Okay, this section here, just this vocabulary here on this slide. Please read through this on your own. Okay, just go to your text and read through. If need be, look this up in the glossary to make sure you understand the difference between all of these. I'm going to launch straight into talking about a specific bacterial disease. And the first group of bacteria that we need to talk about, if we're talking about diseases of the skin, are the staphylococci, because staphylococci are so incredibly common on the skin itself, but in fact they seldom cause problems because the staphylococci by and large are part of our normal microflora. It's only when they gain entrance to the lower layers of the skin, either through a wound or sometimes through a hair follicle or something like that, that they begin to cause problems. And if they become systemic, if we have a system of sepsis that arises because of staphylococcus, then indeed they can cause a very, very serious situation, which might even lead to septic shock. There are many, many, many strains of staphylococci. There are two species that we are particularly interested in, and these are Staphylococcus aureus and Staphylococcus epidermidis. Those are the commonest members of our skin microflora. As I say, there are many strains of these bacteria, and some of them possess virulence factors which make them much more likely to be pathogenic than others. This one's shown here. This is Staphylococcus epidermidis, and just to remind you, here they're cocci and staphylo, so they're in bunches, not in chains like streptococci as we'll hear, but in bunches like that. So Staphylococcus epidermidis, a very, very prominent member of our skin microflora. And its main interest in clinical microbiology is that it is a very, very common cause of health-associated infections, nosocomial infections. And one reason for that is that it is one of the organisms which can produce a biofilm. It has a capsule around it, which enables it to actually make a thick film in which the cells are embedded, which coat items, for instance, catheters and that sort of thing. And under those circumstances, it can be introduced, of course, into the urethra, into the bladder, whatever. And that is an entirely new habitat for this organism, in which it becomes can become pathogenic. So here's a scan electron micrographs of catheters. This is one which is relatively new, and you can see the surface of the catheter. But just lurking here in the corner here, and shown more prominently here, this is what the biofilm looks like. This is a mixture of slime and capsular material binding tightly to the catheter wall itself, and embedded in it and on it many bacteria, not only of the one kind, this is probably a consortium of various bacteria, but in this case, these are definitely staphylococci that are shown most prominently here. So Staphylococcus aureus is another species of Staphylococcus, also part of our microflora, but it is a very common cause of skin infections of various kinds. And we not only have it on our skin, but many people have it as part of their nasal flora as well. Doesn't cause any problems when it's held in balance by other microflora that are there. There is one virulence factor for all of the staphylococci, which is important, and that is whether or not they possess this enzyme called coagulase. Coagulase causes blood clots to form, and in addition to that, some of the strains have exotoxins that they produce. They're toxins that are actually released, and those can cause sepsis or septic shock. The capsular material around the cells enables these strains to evade immune response. But those capsular materials themselves may also be toxigenic. They may be part of the virulence factor. They secrete many different substances and are actually quite skilled at evading the immune system. For example, they secrete toxins which kill phagocytic cells, prevent them from combating the bacterium. Now, there's a major problem with Staphylococcus aureus, and that is that many of the strains of Staphylococcus aureus have developed very powerful resistance to antibiotics. These are gram-positive bacteria. Formerly, they were easily combated using penicillins and those related antibiotics, which hamper their ability to build a gram-positive cell wall. But they rapidly have developed resistance to most antibiotics that are in common usage. Finally, an antibiotic called methicillin, a very powerful member of that whole family of penicillins, was developed. But the methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, MRSA, methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, are resistant even to methicillin and are a major nosocomial problem because they are so difficult to eradicate once an infection has begun. But please just go back and read this section, page 652, which discusses the process of sepsis, circulation of bacteria in the blood, and the possible resulting septic shock that can arise as a result of it. So Staphylococcus in the skin causes a wide range of different diseases, some of them mild and more a nuisance, others really more serious. And first of all, one of the routes to the inside of the skin is through hair follicles. And this produces a characteristic kind of rash. If Staph aureus is spread from follicle to follicle, say by scratching, you'll actually see it as little tiny white pustular bumps around the hair follicles in a particular area. And this is called folliculitis. Usually very easily dealt with, even with a topical antibiotic. The other kind of folliculitis, which is really much more of a nuisance, and probably many of you have had, is when Staph aureus infects an eyelash on the eye, and it forms a boil, an actual collection of pus, a small abscess, and often extremely painful, really, really irritating and annoying. Often relieved by when eventually the sty bursts and the pus is released. But in many cases, people develop styes repeatedly, over and over and over again, because they have Staphylococcus aureus in their nasal flora and in their sinuses, and those they easily get entrance to the eye, and repeatedly will cause styes. In that case, very often they will be treated with an antibiotic. If staph gets access to deep layers of the skin, it may form an enclosed infection, which is very, very vigorously fought by the immune system and which rapidly accumulates pus and becomes, it's essentially blocked off. It develops pressure and can be exquisitely painful. And this is a boil, proper name, a furuncle. And a furuncle typically has a very inflamed tissue, a collection of pus, and then a head to it, an area at the surface of the skin which becomes necrotic and eventually will come loose, and the boil itself expresses, and the pus and everything leaves the boil. That's often sufficient to begin a healing process. If that furuncle begins to extend through the skin and develops multiple heads, is called a carbuncle. And that's a much more serious situation, because we're at risk then for the bacteria to begin to circulate as a bacteremia in the blood supply. So furuncles and carbuncles need to be carefully treated, because they can in fact lead to sepsis. Now, there's another group of disorders which are referred to as impetigo, and these are crusting sores on the skin caused by Staph aureus, very common in children because they can be itchy. And this is impetigo. It often looks something like, starts as something that looks like a folliculitis, and then gets spread by scratching. And wounds from scratching become infected, and it produces a characteristic kind of look to it, which we refer to as impetigo. Unfortunately, there are a group of Staph aureus which produce very, very virulent toxins. They have very powerful virulence factors. And the first of these is called toxin A, and it's a localized effect, and it causes exfoliation of the skin. It causes the upper layers of the skin to begin to peel off, but it's localized around the site of infection. There is another much more serious toxin called toxin B, which is exported to other areas of the skin, and it begins a spreading exfoliation, which can be much more serious. And this actually, in a nursery, the staph with these virulent factors can be a major problem, because they can be spread by poor hygiene, poor worker hygiene. And this produces impetigo in newborns in a nursery. And it's given its own name, pemphigus, Pemphigus neonatorum. Pemphigus is actually a shedding of deep layers of the skin from an entirely different cause. But this kind of blistering and exfoliation produced by Staph aureus can be serious in infants. So the other thing about Staph aureus, it really can be regarded as a skin disease as well, is this terrible syndrome called toxic shock syndrome. Certain Staph aureus strains can produce a specific toxin called toxic shock syndrome toxin. And it's actually highly soluble. And if it gains entrance to the bloodstream, it causes typical toxic shock, that is a crash in blood pressure, but also it ends up affecting the functioning of organs such as the kidneys. The classic incident involving toxic shock was the development of a new kind of tampon for women, which they did not need to be, it was purported not to need to be changed as often as tampons usually are. could be left in for some time. Unfortunately, a batch of these were infected with Staph aureus with this particular virulence factor. And those Staph aureus bred in the tampon, reproduced in the tampon while it was being used, and released that toxic shock syndrome toxin. And numerous women became extremely ill, and several died as a result. So that was the classic instance of toxic shock syndrome. Okay, so here's this is what impetigo looks like. It's a superficial exfoliation, and typically you can see that probably this kid has been scratching and is spreading it around. So this is the typical impetigo. You can see it can form pustules as well, like this. This is bullous impetigo, and bullous impetigo is the result of a release of toxin A by Staph aureus. And these areas of exfoliation here are around areas of infection. So you've got a little focus of infection here, and it's releasing toxin A and causing that exfoliation. This is when what begins to happen with scalded skin syndrome. This is Staph aureus releasing toxin B, and this may be primary site, but you begin to get exfoliation and deep exfoliation of the skin remote from the site, the actual site of infection, because the toxin is going into circulation. And this can become extremely dangerous. It can become extremely widespread and extremely dangerous, especially obviously in infants and very young children. As the bacterium streptococcus also causes skin infections. Here is streptococcus, classically, again, cocky, and they are in chains, in long chains. And the streptococci are very many and very varied. There are several different kinds which will cause skin diseases. But one of the virulence factors, which is very important, is that they can produce substances which will lyse red blood cells. And this is a group, most commonly, you see this in this group called the beta hemolytic streptococci. And the beta hemolytic streptococci that mostly cause disease. So that can be a warning sign if you have beta hemolysis. It is possible that is a disease causing strep. They have very complex capsules to them, and those the components of the capsules are actually part of the disease profile. So first of all, let's have a look at the hemolysis. There are two different kinds of hemolysis are recognized in bacteria. The first is alpha hemolysis. That is here. This is a sheep's blood plate. It contains red blood corpuscles, which are entire. It's not just a solution of hemoglobin. It's a suspension of red blood corpuscles. These bacteria here are breaking down hemoglobin itself, but not lysing the blood corpuscles. This is a beta hemolytic strep, and what is done, it's releasing the soluble enzyme which actually breaks down the red blood corpuscles and utilizes the hemoglobin, breaks down the hemoglobin as well, producing on a plate, producing this complete clearing. But it is a very important virulence factor for those which do cause disease. So the streptococcal skin infections are mostly caused by a group, they're placed in a group called Group A Streptococci, GAS. This is actually given a specific name, although there's some argument about whether it should be or not. but we refer to them as Streptococcus pyogenes. But I just warn you that there are many, many different strains and varieties within this group. They should probably be split up into separate species. Using serological, immunological tests, we recognize 80 or more members of this group. So it's very, very big, very varied. And they produce a variety of different virulence factors. First of all, those factors which produce that beta hemolysis are called the streptolysins, but it's a group of enzymes. Then they produce these proteins in the cell membrane. I'm not cell membrane, I'm sorry, in the cell capsule. It's exterior to the cell wall. These M proteins actually allow them to stick. Remember that adherence is very important in development of pathology. And they also avoid immune attack on the cells themselves, but the M proteins themselves are antigenic and can cause problems. They also produce high hyaluronidase. This can be, depending on the strain you're talking about, this can be extremely dangerous because this dissolves connective tissue. And we begin when you have a wide-ranging infection with Streptococcus that is producing high hyaluronidase, you're in danger of seeing the terrible necrotizing fasciitis, which produces that spectacular flesh-eating bacteria syndrome. And then we've already mentioned the streptokinases. The streptokinases are enzymes which can dissolve blood clots. We saw them also in Staph aureus. So here's Staphylococcus. And these are the M protein fibrils. This is exterior, here's the cell wall. So this is exterior to the cell wall and sort of capsule around the bacteria. And these are in themselves strongly antigenic and can provoke a powerful immune reaction, unwanted immune response. So here are some of the skin infections caused by Streptococcus. Streptococcus, when it just infects the dermal layer of the skin, causes a condition called erysipelas. And it can, if it is extensive, can be extremely dangerous, but often it is limited in its extent. And it causes localized destruction of tissue, but it does allow Streptococcus to gain entry to the blood and cause sepsis. So that is a danger of it. Necrotizing fasciitis is the proper name for the flesh-eating bacterial syndrome. But, and it's certainly, Streptococcus pyogenes is frequently involved, but you should be warned that in fact, very often flesh-eating is caused by a consortium of bacteria, not just by one. But the exotoxins produced by Streptococcus pyogenes, exotoxin A is particularly dangerous because it excites a very, very powerful immune response, far stronger than is useful in fighting the infection, and is in itself a danger. Streptococcus can also produce toxic shock toxins, which go into circulation and which cause a toxic shock syndrome similar to that of Staph aureus. So this is erysipelas caused by a beta hemolytic streptococcal strain. And this is relatively mild, but you can see exfoliation and the inflammation caused by the bacterium. This, unfortunately, is flesh-eating bacteria, and this is fairly typical because of the powerful high hyaluronidase enzymes that can be produced by the streptococcus. In addition, don't forget that strep, in this instance, may be releasing other virulence factors like factor A, which are causing immune response, which can be extremely dangerous as well. This is a critical very much life-threatening situation. And under these circumstances, what is happening is that the connective tissue is simply being broken down. It's been almost literally being liquefied. And it moves very, very rapidly through the fascia, the connective tissue that surrounds muscles and organs, etc. And the bacteria reproduce extremely rapidly. It's treated with a mixture of antibiotics and debridement, trying to remove tissues that are infected. But it is a very, very, very difficult situation to deal with. So that's staph. So you've got some examples of staph infections, some examples of the streptococcal infections. Those are both gram positives. Now let's have a look at a gram negative, and this is Pseudomonas. Pseudomonas, a very, very common environmental bacterium. It doesn't really constitute part of our microflora, but we would pick up Pseudomonas continuously from the environment. It's gram negative. It's an aerobic bacterium, and in a pathogenic situation, an extremely dangerous bacterium. But it is usual that Pseudomonas is very, very quickly in a pathogenic situation. A normal functioning immune system would recognize Pseudomonas very rapidly, and it's very difficult for it to establish infection. But in immune-compromised patients, such as burn patients who are undergoing chemotherapy, it can be extremely dangerous because it's very difficult to deal with. It's resistant to many, many, many antibiotics, just has natural immunity. This is not acquired immunity, resistance rather. And it causes tremendous problems because it has various exo and endotoxins that it can release, which cause disease. There are some mild infections with Pseudomonas as well. There's one which is commonly associated with hot tubs, and it produces a dermatitis, which often doesn't even need treating. It's a temporary situation. But it does also sometimes in people who swim regularly. It is a cause of otitis externa, of swimmer's ear. That is infection of the ear canal. And that, again, this is relatively easily treated. Largely because it's actually external. It's not internal, it's just causing inflammation, everything on the surface of the ear canal. But as say in immunocompromised patients, Pseudomonas is very, very, very dangerous indeed. There's two species actually, Pseudomonas aeruginosa and Pseudomonas fluorescens, which are notorious in burn patients for resulting in high mortalities in actual fact. Okay, so here's one disease which probably we've all had to one degree or another. Some people have a much worse time with it than others, and that is acne. And acne is very, very strongly associated, of course, with puberty. And this points to one of the most important risk factors for getting acne, and that is that it is a response often to hormonal changes. And for this reason, teenagers are at particular risk to develop acne. But often there are cases where women and during their menstrual cycle, at particular points in their menstrual cycle, may notice that they are more prone to acne than otherwise. So it's the most common skin disease in humans that we know of. And under normal circumstances, in our hair follicles, which consist of a pocket with the hair embedded in it, and they have little oil glands associated with them that secrete a lipid called sebum. And it's intended to first of all, to lubricate the hair itself, but also provide oil for the skin. It exits the hair follicle, and under normal circumstances as well, as the hair follicle can be long-lived, and cells on the sides of the follicle die, they are easily, not under normal circumstances, they are shed through the top of the follicle. However, under hormonal influence, we can begin to not only produce more sebum than is normal, but also begin the quality of the sebum also changes. And it causes blockage of the hair follicles, and a plug of the sebum and of skin cells can form at the mouth of the follicle and block it completely. And then you have a situation where you can begin to get an inflammation of the hair follicle. And perhaps if you have trapped some bacteria in there, bacteria can begin to breed, and it produces a pustule, which is visible as a pimple. So here's something very important to learn about acne. The major predisposing factor is genetics, that's first. The second is hormonal status. Diet has absolutely no impact on acne whatsoever. Eating a lot of oily food, whatever, is not going to increase the amount of sebum that you produce from your hair follicles. Acne is also very definitely not the result of dirt, of having a dirty skin. It has no impact whatsoever on the development of acne. So, in fact, those myths around acne actually lead to extra problems, because people begin, for instance, to scrub their skin. They begin to scrub and scrub and scrub their skin to try and get it clean so that they won't get pimples, and end up irritating the skin, irritating especially the mouths of the hair follicles, and causing them to inflame and be blocked more easily. You can actually make the whole situation worse by doing that. Gentle cleaning is all that's necessary. So here's some more vocabulary for you. A little hair follicle that is just plugged with sebum and maybe a few cells, and produces a white head to it, is called a comedone. And these, when you get a whole lot of them, this is called comedonal acne. And a blackhead is in fact a comedone, where the plug of oil at the mouth of it has become oxidized, and the oil actually changes color. It's not dirt accumulating in the pore. When you get blackheads, it's not that you have plugged them up with dirt. That's actually a reflection of the fact that they're plugged with lipid. And this is typical acne, this typical mild acne. This can result, they can eventually develop inflammation and may even accumulate a bit of pus in them to form a proper pimple. There is a set of bacteria, however, which can become involved. And the most important of these is Propionibacterium acnes. Propionibacterium acnes is a bacterium which specifically grows well inside a comedone, inside these blocked hair follicles, because they actually metabolize sebum. And they produce a range of very irritant fatty acids as a result. And these fatty acids excite a very strong inflammatory response. And these are those really painful, visibly inflamed. Often you can feel the hardened sort of inflammation below the surface of the skin. And this is inflammatory or moderate acne. And for most cases, for teenagers, first of all, you can suffer from acne any time of your life. You can have the occasional comedone develop. That's plain. But in teenagers, for the most part, they suffer from this comedonal and moderate acne. And all that is necessary is topical treatment if something becomes really badly infected, but otherwise moderate cleaning and is all that's needed. There are topical applications that you can use which may or may not assist. But there's another kind of acne which is much more serious. And this is called nodular or cystic acne. And in cystic acne, there's such a powerful response from the immune system that an actual abscess is formed. Not just a pimple or a comedone, but instead a large, deep-lying area of infection and of inflammation, often with quite a lot of pus accumulates. And one of the huge problems with that is that it leads to, just as in an abscess, I described to you how an abscess often develops a necrotic spot at the top, which opens to release the pus. So a similar kind of process happens with nodular acne. And this can be intensely disfiguring. The presence of the acne nodules themselves, the cysts, is very unsightly, but they can resolve and produce an intense scarring. So this is moderate to severe acne. It says severe acne here, but this is not actually comedonal. This is not actually truly cystic acne. There are some which look like they could be heading towards being cystic. The greatest danger with acne is that it can leave scars. But for most people, of course, it's a temporary couple of years of dealing with acne, and then once the hormones settle down, then usually you're okay. But unfortunately, women, definitely there's an association with menstruation, and there's also an association with pregnancy. And some women, not all women, but some women develop acne during pregnancy. Okay, let's have a look just quickly at some of the fungal diseases. Fungal diseases are actually quite common. Again, it is a myth to suggest that we pick up fungus in the gym showers or from having bare feet or whatever. In fact, fungi comprise part of our microflora of our skin, and many of the disease-causing fungi are normally kept in check by the presence of other microorganisms on the skin. Any fungal infection of the body we refer to as a mycosis. And these dermal mycoses arise often because the fungi are able to break down keratin. They metabolize keratin, which is the most prominent protein involved in skin, hair, nails. This is the strengthening protein. And there are a whole range of different kinds of fungal diseases which arise largely depending on the site of the infection. Now that these are referred to with Latin names, making it seem as if these are separate species of fungi. They're not. These Latin names are names for the actual disease. Most of them, however, are caused by the same group of fungi. It just depends where they are. There may be different strains have a preference for one area over another, but they're not necessarily caused by different species. So if it's on the there, first of all, a very common one that I'll just tell you about, which is ringworm, which is a flat, scaly, often about the size of a quarter or so, round lesion on the skin, and that we refer to as ringworm when it's on the body. Now, if you get it on the head, which children very often do, they go through a phase of having this on their head, and this is scalp ringworm. It's called tinea capitis. Tinea capitis on the head. Tinea cruris is also called jock itch, and that is an infection of the groin. And that occurs largely because that is a very humid, moist area, and the strain of fungus that causes this likes that high humidity, that high moisture content. These are also more common in humid climates and in summer. So it causes an intensely painful, burning rash of the skin in the crotch. Tinea pedis, this is athlete's foot. This is the one we often think, oh yes, we picked this up at the gym. No, you didn't. You've always had the fungus present. It's just that periodically it takes hold. And what it does is it dissolves away the tough skin of the foot. And then that often will crack open and will expose the tender, deeper layers of the skin. It can be extremely painful, and often you'll see it between the toes, although it can spread wider on the foot as well, but in between the toes is the classic site. And then there is a group of fungi which can cause infections of the nails, and this is tinea anguium. And the characteristic causes a yellowing and brittling and malformation of the nails, either the fingernails or else of the toenails as well. So this is ringworm. This is very, very common. It occurs in adults as well, but it's common in children, and it's very easily spread from child to child. So they tend to be there. Little epidemics often go through a classroom. This is athlete's foot, tinea pedis, and what has happened is the fungus has eaten through the tough skin layers. It's making its way through and eating the keratin, weakening the upper skin layers so that they crack and expose the dermis underneath. Can be very, very painful, but very easily treated, and usually very easily treated. You just, if you do have it, you just need to be assiduous about treating it for a good long time, for a couple of weeks, in order to ensure that you get rid. But you will, in actual fact, never really get rid of the organism. It's just you want to beat it back and try to establish a normal skin flora, which will keep it in check. Easily treated with over-the-counter things like miconazole, clotrimazole, any of these antifungal things. There is another fungus. Now, what you need to remember is that yeasts are fungi, and they are simply single-celled fungi, or largely single-celled. They may cluster together, but this is Candida. Candida albicans is the commonest disease-causing yeast in actual fact, and Candida pops up all over the place if it gets a chance. Now, if you look in here, this is Candida here, and you see how it's hanging together in these strings, clumps and strings. These are called pseudohyphae, and it's actually a way of resisting the attacks by the immune system. It's too large, for example, to be eaten by a macrophage. And this commonly occurs inside on mucous membranes, inside body cavities such as the mouth, the vagina, in uncircumcised men underneath the foreskin. There you may develop these colonies, these cultures rather, of Candida albicans. In the case of vaginal infections, often has a distinctive smell to it, and a yeasty kind of smell, and then a white discharge, which is a mixture of the cells of the yeast itself. In the oral cavity, it causes a condition called thrush, and you can actually see the yeast growing on the mucous membranes, often on the mouth, inside of the mouth, and down the back of the throat, and can be a painful pharyngitis that arises as a result. This Candida albicans is another of these yeasts that is present all the time. It's present in all of our microflora, but it is very resistant to antibiotics, where bacteria may be very susceptible. And it very often arises after treatment with antibiotics. So you knock out the normal microflora, the Candida survives the antibiotic treatment, and it flourishes in the absence of the other microflora. It can be relatively easily treated, but often these infections are self-limiting in a healthy person. But they can be extremely dangerous in people who are immunosuppressed because there's no control effected. And in people with AIDS, for example, the Candida can extend all the way from mouth to anus, coating the entire digestive system and causing literally fatal disorders of the gut. So here, this is typical thrush infection here of the tongue. And these are all colonies of the yeast growing on the mucous membranes. Here they are here. Okay, so now let's just think also about a couple of other things. Number one, infections of the eye, because the eye, our eyes, basically we're exposing very, very sensitive membranes to the environment, relatively easily infected. But don't forget, we have a strong protective mechanism, and that is our tears, which are antibacterial. Nonetheless, some bacteria can occasionally establish a foothold and cause an infection. And the classic symptom of bacterial infection of the eye is development of conjunctivitis, an inflammation of the conjunctiva, the mucous membrane which covers the eyeball. This, this spreads like wildfire through school classrooms. Very often, however, the cause is viral, not bacterial, but bacterial. There are distinct bacterial causes as well, which are equally contagious. And one of the commonest is this organism here, Haemophilus influenzae. A very misleading name. It has nothing to do with influenza at all. It can, however, cause some of the symptoms of a common cold, like a sore throat. You can have a sore throat from Haemophilus. But it's a common cause of pink eye or conjunctivitis. One reason to mention this is that if you use contact lenses, you need to be extremely careful because you can actually culture bacteria on the contact lens itself as a biofilm, or you can actually culture them in your cleaning fluids and things if you're not careful, if you're not going to adhere to strict hygiene in cleaning your contact lenses. And Pseudomonas is one of the bacteria which is also associated with quite a severe conjunctivitis due to poor contact usage. This is a condition those of you who go into nursing and work in the nurseries may occasionally see. This is a very dangerous condition caused when a woman who has active gonorrhea gives birth. Very often women may have gonorrhea and not be completely unaware of the fact that they have an active gonorrhea because it's high up in the vagina. And they don't notice that they have a problem. But when they give birth, the Neisseria gonorrhea, which is the causative organism, spread all over the child, all over the skin, and especially into the eyes. And it causes this ophthalmia neonatorum, which is very dangerous inflammation of the eyes. But usually women will be tested if they are unsure of their status, of their sexually transmitted disease status. During pregnancy should be thoroughly investigated to make sure that none of these things are present. But if it is known that a woman has active Neisseria, then it's easy to treat the child's eyes with antibiotics. There is another disease caused by a very strange organism. This is chlamydia. Now, you've all heard of chlamydia as a sexually transmitted disease. Chlamydia trachomatis is sexually transmitted, but it's not only sexually transmitted. It can be transmitted in other ways as well. It's a strange organism. It's an intracellular bacterium, and it's very, very small. Again, can be transmitted to a newborn's eyes during birth, but it can be spread environmentally as well. We can acquire it actually from water, from swimming pool water. And in addition, not in the United States, but in other parts of the world, it causes one of the commonest causes of blindness worldwide. And this is a condition called trachoma. Not all strains of chlamydia do this, but in tropical areas, there is a strain of chlamydia trachomatis, which can be transmitted by flies. And flies land on the eyes and transmit to the host. And it sets up a chronic and very, very irritating conjunctivitis. I think, yeah. So this is constant irritation of the conjunctiva and the lining of the eyelids, and it causes the eyelids to swell and to push the eyelashes inwards. They roll over, and the eyelashes actually abrade the cornea and cause blindness. It's a very, very common cause of blindness. But there is a very good treatment, and that is oral azithromycin. And there is a tremendous movement. Now, I think Bill Gates Foundation and I think the Carter Foundation worldwide are trying to eliminate chlamydia trachomatis as a cause of blindness, and having tremendous success, because it does respond, first of all, it responds very well to treatment, but also because hygiene, like limiting the number of flies, this sort of thing, will actually prevent its spread. There are, I will just mention that there are some of these bacteria, these bacterial infections, even Haemophilus and these things which cause conjunctivitis, they can actually cause a specific inflammation of the cornea, and that's called keratitis. And this can be extremely dangerous and runs the risk of damaging the cornea permanently. There are various, I'm not going to talk about them in detail, but there are various viral causes of keratitis, and especially members of that group of viruses called the herpes viruses. And this is, in fact, herpes simplex 1, which causes cold sores, can also cause this. And that is the reason I told you before when I talked about viruses. If you have a conjunctivitis, never, ever, ever use, just pick eye drops off your medicine shelf and use them, because it's extremely dangerous to use eye drops which contain steroids if you're dealing with herpes viruses. Lastly, just again, for those of you who use